So dudes, Ashe is the most common fragger, but she doesn't have to be. If you've been playing competitive shooters for a while, you've probably heard words like entry fragger or support. The truth is, these words only mean so much, and I think that focusing on them can actually pigeonhole your ability to learn the game and actually slow your skill development. This video will explain the individual roles a player will typically occupy in Rainbow Six Siege, and will help make this already confusing game maybe a little bit easier for you to understand. Or I sure hope it does. Do yourself a favor and follow my Twitch channel at the link in the description. I will be co-streaming the NAL Challenger League playoffs today. There are three main types of occupied roles in Siege, carrying overlap with other comp shooters to varying degrees. On attack, this looks like entry, flex, support, and on defense, this looks like deep roamer, shallow roamer or lurker, and anchor. In Rainbow Six Siege, some operators are more suited to different jobs than others, but they can and should take up a different role depending on the circumstances. This can vary widely in terms of the actual character design. Usually the most qualifying differentiator is speed rating. Vigil is a deep roamer through and through. He's a 3-speed character with a camera cloak and weaponry to fight at long to close range. He also has impacts to ensure he can set up his own escape routes, which increases his survivability. Some games like Valorant try to codify all of this into the game design itself, like Duelist and Sentinel roles. But most games have had some iterations of this formula for many years, well before Val. In Battlefield, heal guys could heal, but they had dogshit explosive destruction. Whereas explosion guys had RPGs, but they lacked somewhat in terms of weaponry unless they were up close. Siege doesn't do that as much, but it does make healthy suggestions based off of logic and what tools the operator has in their toolbox. Let's start with fraggers for attack and defense. The attacking equivalent on this dynamic is the entry fragger, while the defending equivalent is the deep roamer. The job of an entry fragger is to be the first person in the building and create space for their team. When I say create space, that's just a fancy way of saying giving you and your team comfort of not getting shot. Synonymous with getting map control. If an entry fragger is doing their job, they can actually contribute to their team even if they die without a kill. If Ashe has a teammate or maybe a couple teammates behind her as she enters an important room, she still contributes even if she loses her one, as long as one of her teammates quickly eliminates the player who killed her. That's called a refrag or a trade. As an attacker, if we gain map control, that's always good. Not every entry fragger has to be an entry fragger per se. Regardless, the thread that usually links them is a gadget that can certainly help you, but isn't going to ruin your strategy when it's gone. Thermite shouldn't be the one going into a random room at the edge of a building first, because if they die, you lose your wall open. However, Thermite is a relatively uncommon character type numbers-wise. His job is only really shared by Ace, and to a certain extent Maverick. At the end of the day, really anybody can be an entry fragger. It just comes down to context and what's necessary at the time. The reason Ashe is a stereotypical entry fragger is because she has an ACOG, a 3-speed rating, and a fast-firing weapon. But Zoph is a 3-armor with a similar toolkit. It's just that Zoph is at a mobility disadvantage, which can make her job a lot more difficult. Some entries have secondary supportive roles kind of slapped onto their job description. Sledge is a verticality operator who is predominantly used to go above and apply pressure through the ceiling, but he'll still be expected to play aggressively for that map control. Some entries have a gameplay loop that almost totally revolves around their gadget, while others kind of bring their gadgets out when the situation calls for it. Ying has 4 super flashbangs, and will often use one to get an initial room of importance before hitting the bomb site itself with the rest of her candelas. Habana, despite having a hard breach gadget, isn't as efficient at getting the main wall as her peers, so she can leverage her 3-speed rating and great weapons to give her the ability to play like an entry even though her kit doesn't appear that way at first glance. Blackbeard and Blitz are unlike Montang in the sense that their shields are not designed for passive backline spotting and pressure, and so even though they're shield characters, they're expected to use their shields as a way to obtain guaranteed map control and force engagements whether the defense wants to take them or not, so they could also be considered entry fraggers. On the other side of this dynamic is the deep roamer, whose job is to prevent the attackers from getting map control. Right now, the most common example of that stereotypical playing for gun kind of defender is Doc with an ACOG. Easy to use and fast firing. Something that gets understated though is that his stims can be used somewhat selfishly as a way to ensure attackers have to shoot him in the head to win that initial 50-50 up engagement. And obviously he can pick himself up from down but not out, which is gonna happen more often than you think because of those long spawn peak length distances he'll be fighting you from. Now I'm of the mindset that Doc is an anchor. He has a gadget that is helpful to his team, so he really should be playing closer to his teammates. It's a bit of a ranked debate. Should you be away from your teammates with a support gadget? Probably not. But people do it anyway. Rook is a little more suited to this in my opinion, because his gadget is passive set and forget utility that will not disappear if Rook dies. Another good example of this would be Valkyrie. Valkyrie's cameras will stay up throughout the course of the round under the right conditions, regardless of whether Valkyrie dies or not. So she gives guaranteed value to her team. Skopos is another example of a roamer who brings guaranteed value even if she dies off site, which ideally you should avoid, If you're playing Scopos, you want to come back to the site if things get too hot, but shit happens. Regardless, even if Scopos dies, she has her passive robot body, which acts as a deployable shield and bulletproof camera chilling on the site. Some roamers have survivability tools that allow them to stay off-site for longer or to get away from danger, like Vigil with his camera cloak. If he gets caught out, he'll use his impact grenades to create an escape route. Stay alive for as long as possible and just be a general pest. But the goal of the Deep Roamer cannot be overstated. The job is to deny map control, and that doesn't necessarily mean taking every single gunfight you can. Sometimes it can mean lying in wait for the perfect flank opportunity and capitalizing on that. Trap operators can be roamers. Cap can play like an anchor if he wants to. Yeah. He can also go up top and set his traps on common entry points. It's all context dependent. Realistically, anybody can be a deep roamer, just like anybody can be an entry fragger, because the job description has more to do with the style of gunfighting rather than the gadgetry itself. Although sometimes, as you can tell, your mileage may vary. Now we get to the middle of the passive to aggressive gunfighting characters with some of our attacking flexes and defending lurkers. I'll start with Flex. So a Flex is a character that kind of sounds like what they sound like, right? They sit in between the two jobs of entry gunfighting or sitting on an angle and just watching it for a while. And this role almost entirely revolves around the gadget. Basically, these characters usually have a supportive tool to help their entry fraggers get in the building and do their job, or to help in the site execute itself. The quintessential Flex of Rainbow Six has always been Nomad. This is a character that commands a lot of respect in competitive circles. If you can appreciate what makes Nomad good, you're already at a point well past the Silver Proletariat. Nomad can be the secondary entry in behind an Ashe, who will probably take the initial gunfight, then trade her out if it's necessary. When that's done, she deploys her air jabs, and a teammate like a Buck or a Sledge can do their work to work vertical. You can use all the air jabs to totally lock down a floor from roaming access, or you can keep a few pocketed for the site hit. Another good example of this would be Lion or Jakebi, who both have powerful enough weapons to justify taking some aggressive fights, while also having useful tools in the early, middle, and late stages of the round. Your heavily drone-oriented operators in the form of Brava and Twitch also kind of occupy this role, since they'll be expected to be on drone a significant portion of the time. But that also means they can gather a ton of information, so they shouldn't just run in and die right away. That would be a waste. Another good example of this would be Zero, with his ability to set up a network of flank watch throughout the entire map that gets progressively more powerful throughout the course of the round. I'd even go as far to say Deimos kind of occupies this role too, although in some instances, he can obviously entry frag off of the intel his scanners provide, so it's kind of situational. For the most part, he kind of helps outline where the initial point of contact is for his teammates, since he can instantly narrow down the position of a deep roamer if they happen to know who it is. But just this ability to even be able to decide whether or not you want to play as an aggressive entry or a backline intel gatherer kind of enforces my point that Deimos occupies the realm of a Flex. This kind of comes down to individual interpretation as to what the team needs at a certain moment in time. But you see a lot of variety in operator selection here. Information gathering, gadget denial, really anything that doesn't have anything to do with opening the wall. Now defense is where things get a little bit interesting, and that's the realm of a lurker or a shallow roamer. And this, again, also depends on the situation. A great example of a lurking defender would be Legion. Legion's gadgets get maximum usability if he manages to charge and deploy all of them within the round. That's true. But the fact that he gets so many of them lets him play a little more loosey-goosey. Also, don't forget that Legion's mines are passive, meaning he doesn't have to do anything to get anything out of them. All he has to do is throw them somewhere. This gives Legion the ability to play on the site like a traditional anchor, or the ability to roam on the top floor and throw his Legion mines wherever he thinks an enemy push might be coming from. This role has an interesting distinction, and the fact that the mobility disadvantage incurred by being a 3-armor isn't as relevant, and so that means just about anyone can do this job, especially if they have an ACOG. Castle is a great example. The UMP stinks on paper, but an ACOG and no recoil will always be of good benefit for a defensive style of gunfighting. These operators, as I've stated before, can usually adopt a passive or an aggressive style depending on what they want to do. Sometimes they will play to hold a piece of map control, much like an anchor would, but in a room next to the bomb site. A good example of this would be Library on Chalet, which my buddy Gabe and I have kind of cooked up a little duo strat combining Mute and Castle. We play it like side anchors, but since we're not on the site, we're obviously not side anchoring. Once again, this role tends to be occupied by an operator that doesn't have active utility that can ruin a win condition in the late round. Castle barricades are more or less meant to be broken, and require the attackers to waste time trying to destroy them, or to use a piece of util to get rid of them. As always, any attempts these defenders make at stalling out map control, should they be successful, are good. Alright, now we're on the VIPs. That's the hard support of attack and defense. On attack, that means opening the wall. On defense, that means holding the final line of the bomb site itself. So for attack, there are really only a couple of operators total that occupy this role, and those are the dedicated hard breachers. I'll talk about the important distinctions between each of them. The one everybody starts with is Thermite. He's one of the most straightforward characters in the game. His gadget is deployed flat on the surface of a hard wall like a typical soft breaching charge, which means he has to get up close and personal to it, which is more risky. The upside compared to his competition is that Thermite opens the wall more quickly, making it difficult to trick. And it opens up the most amount of hard wall. Nobody in the game even comes close in terms of efficiency. Ace, however, can open the wall from a distance, and this is more often than not very useful because it means you don't have to cross an angle you don't want to or get blown up by C4, which is why he is the most commonly played hard breacher in the game, especially at a competitive level. Maverick is a bit more situational and often acts as a supplemental hard breach just in case a Thermite or an Ace goes down, or in many cases these days acts as a dedicated tuber counter, which is very much in style on utility-heavy maps like Lair. If there are hatches on the map that are not surrounded in a sea of C4able floorboards, then he's also a good option to circumvent Cade, which is often on Clubhouse Basement. Hibana, as we've discussed previously, is the most flexible of the hard breachers, but depending on what's needed, she can end up being an important operator to stay alive, at least until she opens the wall. So her case is kind of situational. Her gadget is launchable from a distance, but it takes a long time to blow up. But the catch is that she can tailor her destructive potential to whatever she comes across, conserving resources. So if she sees a castle barricade, she can use just 2 of the charges. The one thing Ace doesn't have in common with any of these operators is a lack of stun grenades, and that's one option that does round out a useful kit for Hibana especially. People get the idea that because you're a hard breacher, you're supposed to play like a wimp in the backline forever, and that's not true. Once the wall is open, you are no longer a support, you're a fragger. You get in there and you light it up with the rest of your team because you don't have a set of Grim Bees to deploy. Callie and Thatcher are also obvious pairings with hard breachers and sit in the hard support category because without them you can't open the wall. Now on defense we have the dedicated site anchors, and these are usually heavily armored characters who have a piece of utility that can't go too far from the bomb site without incurring some kind of inefficiency. So Mute, Melusi, Maestro, those are all good examples of dedicated site anchors. However, Mute is in a special category because his gadgets are very useful away from the bomb site to deal with drones. So, like many things, it's situational. They also usually have pocket shotguns. This pales in comparison to Maestro's Evil Eyes, which require him to be alive to get the most out of the zappy functionality. That kind of relegates him to the role of a site anchor because if he dies roaming, he can't use the zappy function of the cameras. Same deal with Echo, or really any operator that has an active gadget which can be pivotal to the round. These are operators that are relegated to the anchor role as a matter of default, since an early death means they don't get to contribute as much from their toolkit. Mira is another example because her gadget ends up becoming way too vulnerable if it's too far away from the main bomb site. Sometimes there are exceptions. These characters also sometimes have C4. They'll play in the back line, wait for the bomb plant to go down, and then chuck it. They have a lot of tools in their back pocket to use in the site execute itself. That kind of boils it down in more ways than one. Each operator has a set of tools that can end up proving more useful, either in the early, middle, or late stages of the round, and many anchors have tools for plant denial that end up being useful in the late stage. Obviously, Echo is another great example of this because his drone can be kept in the backline to interrupt a plant and lock the round up for a win. Sometimes these operators can take advantage of a shotgun too, because they'll be playing for that one-shot denial around the edge of a doorway, making it even more difficult for the attack to hit the site. Smoke in that case is an example of a quintessential close-range gunfighting anchor because his weapons are exceptionally lethal up close and can only be challenged with a great deal of utility. Sometimes anchors can have ACOGs, and sometimes they can't. Kind of depends on the mood that Ubisoft is in. And that's every role in Rainbow Six Siege and a shell nut. Don't forget to check out my Twitch channel, links in the description. Thanks for watching. Deuces.